morning, sleepyheads. I'm Sergeant Slaughter. I'm glad to see you got your lazy carcasses out of bed.
Hey folks, Salty Seaman here, coming at you with a high-profile stolen valor case going back a very, very long time. And as someone who pointed this out to me, maybe the most me kind of video I could do. We got wrestling, we got G.I. Joe, we got military stolen valor. I guess I gotta cover this one. And quite honestly, it's one I've suspected for a long time and just kind of, never really looked into it on my own. I'm not really, I don't, fancy myself some kind of guy who goes out and points out stolen valor and all that stuff, though it is obviously a topic I cover a lot here. But in this particular case, we're talking about Bob Remus, a lifelong professional wrestler, employee of the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, better known by the character of Sergeant Slaughter. Now, starting in the early 70s, Bob Remus became a pro wrestler, and after a few years, he took on the gimmick of the nasty drill instructor, going by the name Sergeant Slaughter, starting in the AWA and then through various territories in the 70s. This was he started around this character around 72-ish, height of the Vietnam War. A lot of the audience had experience with drill instructors, so he was a natural heel, just a nasty, nasty dude. And then coming around into the 80s, when patriotism was popular again, suddenly we're looking at the hero Sergeant Slaughter fighting the terrible foreign menaces such as the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. Just for the record, Bob Remus, the person, has never served in the Marine Corps in any capacity. But he is still claiming it, out of character, and that's where this case, I think, is a very, very interesting and kind of complicated bit of stolen valor. Like I said, in the 70s, 70s through the 80s, obviously wrestling was very protective of, keeping the illusion that everything is real, what they call kayfabe, for those unfamiliar with it. Good guys, bad guys kept their gimmick even when they weren't in the ring, when they weren't performing as a wrestler. The Moondogs would act crazy in public. The Sheik, the original Sheik in Detroit famously never broke character for anyone, even other wrestlers often, if he didn't trust them. He didn't want people to know he really was Ed Farhat, a second-generation immigrant, versus, the crazed Sheik from the Middle East who didn't speak English. Stuff like that. That's normal. It's wrestling. You could almost put it to, say like I, would never go after Don Rickles for playing Chief Sharkey, because we know he's Don Rickles, and when the camera's off, he's not pretending to be, a chief in the Navy. We know that as a storyline. Wrestling's a little different. And part of the story that kind of even brings more interest into this is not new. When Sergeant Slaughter was at the height of his popularity in the mid 80s and was signing with, so popular he signs with Hasbro to be a character in G.I. Joe, both toy and cartoon and comic. They release press releases. They're talking, the real Bob Remus here. And he is still, even though this is still an era where, they don't really break character, but it's kind of getting there, where, you need to keep the wrestlers were starting to, be more of themselves outside the ring. But it's still kayfabe era, and Bob Remus is still claiming to be a former Marine. The dates he gave were, wrong. He said like 68 to 72 or 76 or 66 to 72 or something like that, even though he started wrestling in 1972. So we know, obviously, the timeline doesn't work out. While a character, he made various claims to being in Vietnam, and of course, he's always claimed to be a drill instructor. But in the mid '80s, stolen valor just wasn't a thing. There was very, very few people out there beating the drum to going after people who were fakes and phonies. But there were articles published at the time where the deal of him coming into G.I. Joe was made, and people complaining that the guy never actually served. Look at this article. It goes back, 1985, But again, it's pro wrestling, and everyone looked at it like, no one cared about Stolen Valor until he's a pro wrestler, and they just, everyone just assumed they're lying because they're pro wrestlers. That's what they do. I think the problem definitely comes more and more into the modern age, where kayfabe is dead. Wrestlers definitely keep a separation between their real life and what they did versus what their character does. Very, very few actually try to maintain that kayfabe image. And here's where we have a case of Bob Remus, who by this point should know better and should have came clean before this, much, much longer, but it was still making those claims. They were always, just from what I saw, because I remember doing the video a while back on the wrestling gimmick the military gimmick in pro wrestling. I kind of started wondering, I think I even say in the video, I might have making some squirreless comments on that, but I'm not 100%. I have to go back and rewatch that. But the bottom line is, in this day and age, he's retired. He's a backstage agent for WWE, but he's still making those claims that he did serve time in the Marine Corps back in the 60s and 70s, which is just totally not true. This came up recently someone on the Figure 4 Wrestling Observer board. Shout out to the board member since 2006. That found this old article and was researching these claims, because it's just one of those things we've always kind of accepted and no one's really ever looked at. And I got to say, it's disappointing. It's something, I know he's probably old school, and he's, at the very least wanted to keep maintaining like that I really did this, but at the same time, it's disingenuous to people who actually served, and he's worked with a ton of guys who did serve and served in the Marines, such as Road Dogg Jesse James, Randy Orton for a time. But, I don't want to get this confused with playing a military guy in wrestling as a character. That, in my opinion, is fine. No one, Corporal Kirshner really was a paratrooper in the Army. But we all know, GI Bro, we knew Booker T wasn't a real military guy, never served. In fact, we know he's actually a felon. But no disrespect. Booker came a long way from his childhood. And there's been many various colonels and generals and whatnot as a gimmick. And we never took it seriously because we knew these guys were playing a character. When the Iron Sheik played Colonel Mustafa, who was an Iraqi general in this ridiculous outfit, we knew he was the Iron Sheik. We know he's a former member of the Iranian Olympic team, Mr. Kozlov. We know his backstory, and we knew that was a character. Jim Cornette playing General Cornette. Obviously it's completely ridiculous. These are characters. I think because of the nature of pro wrestling, where it does often blend the line between reality and kayfabe. We let a certain thing go, but I think in this day and age, it's completely unacceptable. It's something, just out of respect for the actual Marines who served, Bob should have came forward and said, like, okay, this was part of my gimmick, and we had to keep the gimmick alive no matter what back in the day. But no, honestly, I never did. I never was an actual Marine. And I think, maybe his mentality is just like, I've been doing this so long and no one's called me on the carpet about it. Other than a little bit in '85, and which no one seemed to pay attention to. He just figured he could get away with it. Even I'm sure he's had to have seen the modern era of the digital age, and busting phonies has become a big thing among on online, and just how easy it is to do this kind of thing, where people who you look at people who have claimed things they never did in the military, going back way before this, was just a very, very common thing, as I touched on in my original Stolen Valor video. So I guess that's all I got to say about it. Just want to say I love, even before I was a wrestling fan, I love Sergeant Slaughter because I was a G.I. Joe fan first, and Sergeant Slaughter was cool. And when I became a pro wrestling fan, I appreciated his work, and I loved him as a character, both as a bad guy and a good guy, and always had a soft spot for the Sarge. And finding this out for sure, something I've always kind of suspected but never really wanted to get look into too far, is disappointing to me as a person and as a fan. And I would hope Bob will come forward and just flat out admit it, give his apologies, even if he wants to put a little kayfabe excuse of why he did it. I think we could partially understand, but at the same time, it's like, Sarge, you knew better. You just knew better. That's all the Salty Seaman's got for now. I'll talk to you freaks later. Peace.